talk about the importance of voting. And with Black history, you can sum it all up in our country as follows. This is a country and a government and a system and a society and cultural mores that from day one in Jamestown was established with white landowning men at the top. And then when they created the first representative democracy in the Western Hemisphere, it was for them. A month later, the first recorded Africans were brought to these shores at what is now Fort Monroe as property. And then women were recruited as wives. So the power structure was always set with white landowning men at the top. And when our country was created, when our government was created as a government by, of, and for the people, with a promise that all men were created equal, the struggle of the next 400 years was, how do we make that true for everybody? How do we make that true for the formerly enslaved people and women and the indigenous people whose land was stolen when Jamestown and later Virginia in this country were founded? Specifically for Black communities, though, out of the ashes of the Civil War, in Reconstruction came the right to vote, came citizenship, came the first steps for men to making that promise true, but it was a fight. And in the wake of Reconstruction, when we had Black men voting for the first time, when we had Black men holding office for the first time, owning businesses, owning property, there was a backlash. And that resulted in voter suppression and disenfranchisement, propaganda, heard of the lost cause narrative, and the lie of white supremacy, and racial terror, lynching, violence. That pattern, speaking of Groundhog's Day, has repeated constantly over and over in American history. Out of the ashes of disenfranchisement from the early 19th or 20th century grew the civil rights movement that culminated in the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And why in both civil rights movements was voting so important? Because from voting comes every other right. And you can't have a government by, of, and for the people unless all the people participate. So, but in response to those gains, there was a backlash where Richard Nixon said, I'm going to use the Southern strategy, propaganda. I'm going to use forms of disenfranchisement. And yes, there was violence to respond to the progress that Black people made. But we didn't give up. We kept going, we kept going, we kept going, and it culminated in the election of the first Black president of the United States. And later, the first Black vice president of the United States. And what happened? There was a backlash that involved propaganda, stolen elections, and birtherism, that involved violence, January 6th. And that involved voter suppression, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act by the Supreme Court, and a wave of voter suppression laws across not just the South, but the entire country. But throughout it all, Virginia has been a beacon of hope. Because yes, we were the birthplace of American slavery, but we were the birthplace of American democracy. We were the birthplace of massive resistance, but we were also critically important to the civil rights movement. And now, when we got, you've heard me say this time and time again, when other states were putting barriers in the way of voting, we were passing a Voting Rights Act. When other states were putting abortion bans in place, we were removing restrictions on abortion. All of that was because you came out and voted, because you came out and voted to put a Democratic trifecta in place. You came out and voted to restore the House of Delegates to Democrats to protect the progress we've made. I'm here to ask you to do it again, because part of the backlash now is let's not tell a complete and accurate history, because if people know our history and recognize the pattern that I just laid out, then they'll recognize when we're in the backlash. And there are a lot of people that don't want that to happen. So that's the importance of Black history, because Black history is American history, and making sure everybody knows it. But we have to use that knowledge to ensure that we get people out to vote. And yes, you hear it in Virginia every single year. I'm going to say it again. I mean it every year, but I really mean it this one. This is the most consequential election of our lives.
Right.
Because there is a man running to be president who has said he will be a dictator on day one, who has said he will use the power of the presidency for revenge. Believe him.
Yes.
Believe. And I have seen in my almost year, it'll be one year in March, 1 year to my election, February 21st, 1 year to my swearing in March. And what I have seen are MAGA Republican attempts to roll back voting rights, reproductive rights, and degrade the trust that people have in our institutions, so that, and to make sure people aren't learning a complete and accurate history, so that they can facilitate their leader coming back to power.
Yes.
You are what stands in the way, and you are what's on the front lines to ensuring that American democracy not only thrives, but that we remain a government by, of, and for the people that finally will include all of the people.